Hi, this is Stephanie. Let me tell you a story. This is chapter 4 of my long form work in progress, The Infinite Library. Chapter 4 is called Light the Beacons. Time moves differently in the library and in each of the separate universes. The library strove to keep their days the same length as the days in Prime for the sake of some consistency between the two biggest universes that needed to communicate. Ideally, one day that passed in Prime was one day that passed in the library, even if nothing of narrative significance happened in the library that day. The agents referred to this as operating in real time, and by and large, the agents weren't fans. In their own universes, agents didn't operate in real time, but rather in narrative time. Readers would get bored if they had to read about each individual day in which nothing out of the ordinary happened, and so narrative time allowed the universes to move their people forward from one important event to the next. It was possible that the people in the universe would have survived a long, hard winter, for example, but that didn't mean that the people would have to live each individual day of that winter. They could simply skip to the end, or the middle if something important happened, knowing they had survived something terrible. The consequences were real, but the time spent was simply ignored. Because of this change in how time passes, by the next time the team members gathered, they had each experienced a different amount of time. The call to the library came to them in different manners, appropriate to their home universes, but they were bound by their oaths to return as soon as they saw or heard the call, and they were all given the ability to create a direct transit path to the library from wherever they were in their universe. Veronica, of course, had been working in real time, so she had lived through every day of the month it had been since the end of the last mission. Nothing much had changed at her desk, though there was a small bud vase holding a single red rose that had never been there before, and she smiled much more often than she had the last time the team had met at her desk. Sophia was the first to notice both of these things, as she was the first to make her way to the team's work area after receiving the call. Sophia's stride always relaxed incrementally as she moved further away from her universe, as it moved her away from the pain she lived with day to day. By the time she was in the bullpen, she usually had folded up her cane and stored it away in one of her pockets because she didn't need it anymore. This time, however, the cane remained for longer, and she maintained a pronounced limp. After she and Veronica greeted each other with hugs, Veronica helped her ease her way into a chair at the round table and looked down her nose at her teammate. So something happened, I'm assuming. Sophia sighed, brushing the wisps of graying hair out of her face. Veronica noted that there were more grays than strawberry blonde these days. Oh, yeah, something happened, and that something's name is Jerry. When I got back home after the last mission, that was the first phone call I received. I hadn't even had a chance to make a cup of tea. Speaking of which, Sophia eyed the kitchenette at the end of the room away from the report center, then gave Veronica a pathetic look with her big green eyes. You wouldn't be willing to get a cuppa for an old friend, would you? Laughing, Veronica straightened from the edge of her desk where she'd been leaning and started toward the kitchenette. Only because I expect to hear all the sordid details about this Jerry character when I get back. It must have been quite something to cause you a lasting injury. Sophia settled back in her chair with a sigh and tried to make herself more comfortable. As far as she was concerned, it had been about 4 months since the last time she'd been in the library, and nearly all of that time had been spent trying to keep Jerry out of jail, the newspaper, or the hospital. She'd been reasonably successful on the first, less so on the second, and had wound up in the hospital herself with the last misadventure. Sometimes Sophia wished that Jerry would find some other friend with mystical powers to bail them out of the trouble they got themselves into, just for a change of pace. However, Jerry was the protagonist in Sophia's universe, so Jerry's plot armor kept them safe, while most of the repercussions bounced their way to Sophia, and there weren't many people willing to play straight person to that kind of behavior. Sophia managed to get her bum leg up on another chair at the table, relishing the stretch the change in position provided, and forced herself to take a few long, deep breaths. Spending a day or two in the library would do great things for her spirit and her flesh. Sophia had only closed her eyes for a moment, but it felt like she had been jolted out of a deep sleep when Nureddin pulled the chair out from under her leg. She started, then yelped as the sudden movement that had caused her leg and back to have an extremely poor reaction to her decision to move too rashly. Nureddin started as well, caught off guard by her cry of pain. Sorry. His voice was raspy, as it usually was when he first arrived at the library. He had told the team once that he didn't spend much of his time in his home universe speaking out loud, so it was like brushing the dust off his vocal cords when he met with the team. I didn't see your leg there. Are you all right? Concern was shining through his eyes, and what little of his face wasn't covered by his beard. I'm all right, Sophia gasped, then took a moment to breathe slowly and straighten out before she spoke again. I'm all right, she repeated, hoping to get Nureddin to stop looking at her as though she were made of porcelain. You startled me more than anything, is all. Please, sit. She gestured toward the now empty chair and used the gesture to readjust her posture into something more comfortable all around. Sophia was already feeling the healing benefits of being in the library, which made the whole interaction much less terrible than it would have been in her home universe. Fortunately, Veronica's narrative timing was exquisite, and she arrived carrying a mug of hot water and an assortment of tea bags and sweeteners for Sophia. She set them in front of the woman, smiling. I know your tea preference varies depending on things I have no understanding of, so I figured I'd bring you one of everything and let you figure it out from there. She then turned to Nureddin and greeted him with a short bow, which he reciprocated before finally taking the proffered seat. Sophia felt herself relaxing a little more as she shuffled through the tea selection, finally choosing a black tea with ginger and peach for her first cup. She managed to open the small packet of honey without getting it all over her hands or her long, billowy blouse, which was an achievement all its own, then tipped half of the sweetener into the mug before setting the packet aside on top of a pink artificial sweetener package. She stirred the honey into the water to encourage it to melt, grateful that Veronica had thought to bring stir sticks, then removed the tea bag from its wrapper and dropped it into the mug. She looked at her watch to note the time and how long the tea should stay in the water, then leaned back in her chair, carefully moving the tea bag up and down in the water and watching the color of the water begin the slow change as the transformation began. Nureddin watched the entire process with a sense of awe. He knew what it was to hunt down and kill an animal for food, and there were certain rites that needed to take place to keep the gods in their spheres placated, and ensure that later hunts would also be fruitful. Everyone knew that. Still, he'd never seen anyone place so much reverence in the act of adding a bag of dried herb clippings to a cup of hot water. Only Sophia could make him even contemplate drinking something prepared by another person, and only because she gave the impression that she would consider it a personal and spiritual affront to sully the act with poison or some other adulterant. He'd heard her get into a rather heated argument with another agent once about the addition of milk to this beverage, and Nureddin couldn't get the image of the goddess of the harvest coming to the library to smite the disbelievers and the profaners. Nureddin didn't even understand why one would add milk to a cup of hot water with dry herbs, but he was certain that it was wrong to do so. And that's part 1 of chapter 4 of the Infinite Library, Light the Beacons. You can read along with the story at Royal Road, and you can find links to it from my blog, insertscenehere.blogspot.com. As always, thanks so much y hasta pronto.